Hey there, I'm Ari, the Tech Buyers Guru, and I'm back with the SilverStone LD03 Mini-ITX chassis. Now, I did a preview of this case where I showed you around the features and what's unique about the case. Now I'm going to show you how I build it, and then I'm going to get into the performance and my conclusions on the case. Now, as you can see, I've actually taken the liberty of installing quite a few components in this case already. I'm going to give you a quick close-up of that. Now, inside you'll find that I do have the Gigabyte motherboard mounted. The 2700X processor is installed. Yes, it is supposed to be upside down like that. I've got my 2 sticks of G.Skill DDR4 3400 RAM, and behind that heatsink shield is a 970 Pro solid-state drive from Samsung. Now, just for purposes of fitment, I actually did go ahead and install my 1080 Ti hybrid video card here. Now on the side, I also have my two 2.5-inch drives. I've mostly done this just to see how the chassis accepts solid-state drives. These are the only 2 mounts in the case, and I've used them both. I did have a little issue, which was that I didn't actually have access to all of the screws once my motherboard was installed. So I installed this motherboard first, and then I couldn't actually get all the way back here and install screws for the back drive. So I only have 2 screws here, 1, 2, holding this drive in. So in theory, it can kind of move a little bit if I push on it. So everything's installed other than what we see here on the table. I have my 800 watt titanium power supply, and of course that bundle of cables, which will be a challenge. We have the Corsair H60 liquid cooler, and although it does come with a Corsair fan, I'm going to go all the way with this. This is a high-end build. I've decided to go with my high-end Noctua fan. This, of course, is their NF-A12 X25, essentially the best 120mm fan in the business. It's both quiet and produces a lot of airflow as well as a lot of static pressure, which makes it great for a radiator where you're having to blow through those fins. And I also decided I'm going to give a try with this very cool addressable Rgb strip that SilverStone supplied, the LS03. Because my motherboard does have a digital RGB or addressable RGB header, I'm going to see if I can rig up some cool lighting in this case, because of course it will have glass on 3 sides. So that's where we are now. I've really left the hardest parts for last. I think fitting this power supply in, along with all these cables, is going to be a pretty big challenge in this case, as it is with most ITX cases. And then fitting the CPU cooler and fan, well, it shouldn't be too hard, but given that it's going to be the last component to go in, it's going to have the least space for me to work with. By the way, the power supply does have to go in before this because the radiator would block the power supply. All right, I've got my power supply mounted to this kind of this bracket here, and then I've got all my cables attached. I noticed actually that SilverStone supplies a slightly shorter PCIe cable. The one I showed you before is 24 inches long. This one is 18 inches long, which is about 15 inches longer than I need in this chassis, but it's still just a little bit better in terms of managing the cable overflow. So let's go with that one. I'm going to slip this power supply into the chassis. Remember, the fan should be facing the back of the chassis where you do have an intake for that fan. Now, I've got a lot of cables and not a lot of space, so got to try to clear everything that's already in the chassis, including this thick USB cable, the front panel cable, which keeps getting caught on everything. And we're almost in, and I think we're in. So I'm going to show you how that goes. There's 3 tiny screws, which I will show you where they go. And then you see that there's actually this additional cable here. This is the kind of the extension cable for your power supply, because your main cord to the wall doesn't actually attach here. It attaches to the outside of the chassis. So this is an extension. So I'm affixing the 3 screws that I had to take out. It's always kind of a bummer when you have to disassemble a case before you assemble it, but with ITX cases that's often true. Here we go. All right, so things are looking pretty good. Of course, I have to do some cable management here and attach my cables. In terms of cabling, remember there's not much place to hide this stuff. So here's my motherboard 24-pin cable. I did kind of tuck my SATA power cables out of the way. And I actually ran the EPS cable behind, you could say behind the chassis. So this is the EPS power cable. I ran it up there so it wouldn't be just running right across, which I think does improve the looks of it. I'm not sure what I'm going to do about this motherboard cable. I think it's just gonna, it's pretty stiff. So I don't think I can really tuck it out of the way very easily. Luckily, it's pretty short. So thanks to SilverStone for at least making that cable quite short. And then of course my PCIe power cable is here. I actually did tuck it behind this frame here. So even though it's, what did I say? It's 18 inches long. It's not making too much of a mess of my case. So that's where we are now. The next step is to install that radiator down in the bottom mount here. I've already removed the mesh that attaches to the bottom of the chassis. You do need access to the bottom of the chassis to affix the screws. So luckily it's quite easy to disconnect. And now I'm going to go ahead and do that. As long as I'm down here at the bottom of the chassis, I might mention this nice cutout here for very long video cards. This case does have room for video cards up to 12 inches long. This one is a reference size 10.6 inch card, so it doesn't actually reach this cutout here. But that cutout gives you just a little bit more space. I think it actually would allow, it would actually allow your video card to hang out basically below the bottom of the chassis, because this is the bottom of the chassis. So kind of a cool solution that SilverStone came up with for extra long video cards, which are pretty common these days. Basically, it just kind of hangs out the bottom. So that works if you have a really long card. I guess the only limit is whether or not it hits the floor, right? So, okay, so let's go ahead. Remember, I'm going to be using this Noctua fan because, frankly, it's a really, really good fan. So, actually, for an ITX case, this is actually pretty easy to work with. And I think, SilverStone is really the master of ITX cases. And they've learned so much along the way. I mean, they've been producing cases for the ITX market since I think 2005. And they know how this stuff goes together. And frankly, they probably know how it doesn't go together. And so this case is really optimized not just for fitting stuff, which a lot of cases nowadays are, but actually for making it manageable. I just find that there's a lot of cases out there that advertise certain levels of compatibility, and yet then when you actually try to install the stuff, it's just a total chore. All right, great news. I got everything packed in here. In fact, in the intervening time, I decided to actually even install SilverStone's LS03 addressable Rgb strips. My rule of thumb for addressable Rgb strips is to get them in a place where you don't actually see the individual lights shining at you. So I actually affixed them all around. I used 2 strips all around the top of the case. So a little bit later on in this video, I'll show you what that looks like. Just a subtle color added to the case, because of course it's a tempered glass case, so you want to be able to see inside the case. So I did do that with the LS03 addressable Rgb strips. Make sure that your motherboard has a digital RGB header if you're going to use a strip like this. That's a 3-pin header with a space in between the second and third pin. All right, I'm going to flip this on its side so you can see the bottom here. This is a mesh fan filter. It's a little bit tricky to get back on. Let's see if I have, there's like a little, oh yeah, here's a little tab here that goes in here. I found that unless you snap in all of those snaps, it'll pop right off. So yeah, now it's back on. Okay, so that's a nice fan filter. It covers up the whole bottom of this of the chassis, although most of this isn't really used. I guess actually the video card can maybe pull a little bit in through here. And like I said, if you have a really long video card, you just pop this off and you use that extra space, right? You can get all the way down to the bottom of the feet. If you really, if you had a video card that was a lot longer than reference. Okay, let's pop that back on, make sure it's secure. Next I'm going to install the top. The top should just slide in. So it's actually a lot easier to get this on than to get it off. Then we have to do the sides. Okay, just line up the bottom, pop those tabs. Got that one in? It's coming together. Maybe what would be even cooler than what SilverStone did here with these pop tabs here would be if these panels were doors, if they were hinged off. That would be pretty cool. But I guess what SilverStone's thinking is once you build this, you actually don't have to get under the side that often. What you're most likely to get into is the front panel, which comes on and off really easily. And in fact, that's what you actually have to, you have to take this off first. That just pops in. You cannot take off the side panels without taking the front off. So this front basically acts like the side panel on any other case. But there you go. All right. So you get the impression of what it looks like, and now you know what's inside. Quite a bit of firepower in terms of gaming. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hook this up. I'm going to do a couple of benchmarks to see temperature, noise, and, well, I'm actually not going to benchmark performance because I know what the CPU and GPU can do, but I'm more interested in what this case does in terms of noise and thermals. So next what I'm going to do is some benchmarks. I'm going to plug this in, get it running. I'm going to get some thermal numbers and I'm going to get some acoustic numbers to see how this compares to a couple of other cases I've tested with this very same gear. Those were ATX cases, but same GPU, same CPU. So it may be an apples to oranges comparison, but it could bode well for this case if it keeps up with some larger ATX cases. All right, so that's going to be the test. And then I'm also going to show you what the case looks like lit up, because part of this, of course, is the acoustic, the aesthetic package, right? You could, if you wanted to just have maximum airflow, this would all just be mesh all around, right? That's simple. What SilverStone has done here is kind of tried to balance aesthetics with thermal management. And so they've got that bottom to top airflow, that air channel that goes through, but at the same time, they have these 3 glass panels to make it look kind of, you know, cutting edge. Something more than just a mesh box, which doesn't look that attractive. All right, I've completed the performance testing on this case, and here's what I found. First things first, you're going to want the GPU Radiator mounted up top. I did actually swap them just to test it out, and what I found was that the GPU basically would cook the CPU. All right, so if when I had the GPU down here, I found that in gaming the CPU ran actually like 14 degrees hotter, the exact same game sequence. All right, so just having the GPU down here heated up that CPU another 14 degrees. Yes, the GPU is a little bit cooler, it was 7 degrees cooler, but the overall trade-off I thought was a bad one. And another reason is actually it was quite a bit louder to have the CPU radiator up here. Not sure why, maybe the CPU pump is a little bit louder, but whatever the case is, just overall this is much better unless all you care about is your graphics card's temperature. And when you're going with liquid cooling, it's still going to be cool. It maxed out at 70 degrees in this setup with the graphics card up here. It was a little bit cooler down here, but you don't really need the graphics card that cool, and I just didn't like the idea of my CPU getting up to 70 degrees simply because it was intaking so much hot air, because the CPU really shouldn't run at 70 degrees when gaming, especially on liquid. So that's what I have, so that's what my recommendation is. Overall, compared to ATX cases with the same gear, it was actually really on par, particularly the CPU. I was really impressed, given that this is just 120 millimeter, both of these are 120 millimeter coolers. Previously, I ran the 2700X with a 240 millimeter cooler. It was actually really comparable. So props to SilverStone for getting that right. Now, the one thing that I would mention, and this kind of goes to my conclusion about this case. It's a beautiful case. It's a really unique design. It's a fresh look at what ITX cases should be. I think it goes with tempered glass, but it doesn't throw RGB at you. You can add that if you want. I did use these really great LS03 light strips from SilverStone, which I highly recommend. Adds a touch of light around the edges. I think that's pretty cool. But SilverStone was a little bit unlike itself. It wasn't true to form when it came to the cooling design. I think what they should have done was actually punch out a piece here, because there's actually a plastic frame. This is actually a plastic frame the glass is mounted on. They could have actually just made that frame come across here and given us a radiator mount, and then allowed us to have an exhaust up here and an exhaust out, and then have intake from the bottom. I think that's what they should have done. They did think about making an intake here for the graphics card, which would be fine, but it wouldn't provide another radiator mount. There's a lot of open space here, and open space is good for airflow, but that we could have nearly as much open space and fit a radiator vertically here, and then get that airflow that's unencumbered by going through a hot radiator, and you'd still have plenty of airflow. So there's just a little bit too much unused space here that isn't going to the best advantage, because it's pumping hot air through the case, okay, from down here. Now, what if I had used air cooling in this case? I could have put a CPU cooler on here. Yeah, I could probably fit a 120 millimeter cooler. You know what? You couldn't have any overhang though. Any 140 millimeter cooler might overhang and it would hit the SSD tray. So I could put a 120 millimeter CPU cooler in here, just a fan down here, the stock fan that it came with, and then I'd have, you know, a simple air-cooled GPU, because you actually couldn't fit, I don't think you could fit a tower cooler and this radiator up here. But here's the deal, that would choke off your GPU. This GPU would cook against the glass. It's a 250 watt, the 1080 Ti I think is a 250 watt GPU. SilverStone says anything above 200 watts is really not ideal for this case, and they are right. This thing was running pretty hot even with liquid cooling. So if you put an open air, like a 1080 Ti, RTX 2080 or an RTX 2080 Ti, it'll just cook in here. So I still think you want to go liquid, and nowadays actually liquid cooled GPUs cost about the same as air cooled GPUs, which is weird. It's this inversion created by NVIDIA's unusual pricing scheme, shall we say. Did I say scheme? Oh. So overall, you know what? I give this 4.5 out of 5 stars. And it's because I think it's such a unique design. It's so aesthetically pleasing, and it gets most of the performance aspects right. I think it's a really good compromise. I just feel SilverStone could have done a little bit more to improve the cooling even further. The basic layout is perfect. I love this layout. I love the power supply mounted low. It's an SFX unit, so it doesn't take up much space. Basically disappears. You can't even see it back here. It's all the way back here. It's like it doesn't even take up any space in this case. I love the general layout. I think there's a lot of potential for this case. But I just think they need to punch a few more holes into it. Okay? I understand what they were doing with the glass. Good first try. Let's leave the glass alone next time, and let's go with a little bit more airflow. The other thing I do have to address is pricing. This is coming in at $160 in the US. It's actually going to be a lot cheaper in other parts of the world. The US is being affected by tariffs, and it's also going to affect Canada, because actually a lot of the shipments go through the US. So to US and Canadian viewers, I'm sorry to say, it's going to be about $160 US, and that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money for an ITX case. It's a lot of money for any case. When SilverStone first announced it, they were talking about something that was going to be closer to 120. And I'm just hoping that someday we will get back to that point where they can sell this for 120. But right now, they're not able to do that. So I'm just going to leave that there. You take it as you will. It is a fact of life and of economics right now. So overall, just kudos to SilverStone for bringing the ITX market something new and something fresh. I really like this format. I think the footprint is great. I love how it fits on the desk. I think there's a long future in this family of cases. I'm sure that Silverstone will iterate on it and give us new cases like it has with every other case family. You get one good design and they'll make a bunch of other models off of it. So again, 4.5 out of 5 stars. I like it. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.